You know, Herbert Hoover once stayed here on this floor.
The vacuum guy?
No, the president.
I'm Mr. Beat, not to be confused with Herbert Hoover, who this video is about. As I've said before in previous videos, I think Hoover was a bad president. And odds are, if you don't know much about Hoover, you probably at least know that he was a terrible president. But he was only president for 3.6% of his life, so what about the other 97.4% of his life?
It's 96.4%.
Well, he had a lot of accomplishments in that other 97.4% of his life.
96.4%.
And he also overcame a lot of obstacles. So in this video, let's change your perception about Herbert Hoover. He was more than just a crappy president after all. Here's hoping that this video will change your opinion about Herbert Hoover forever. Herbert Hoover was born on August 10, 1874 in the small town of West Branch, Iowa. He was the second of 3 children, the middle child of Jesse and Huldah Hoover. Jesse, Herbert's dad, was a blacksmith who gave that up to open up a tractor store. Herbert's mom, Huldah, who was originally from Canada, raised the family but was also apparently a pretty darn good seamstress. Huldah and Jesse were devout Quakers, members of a type of Protestant Christianity united by a belief that God can be found in everyone. The Hoover family undoubtedly valued hard work, generosity, and simplicity. I'm standing in front of Herbert Hoover's childhood home here in West Branch, Iowa. He spent the first 11 years of his life in this house. A very tiny, modest house, which was well before the tiny house movement, I might add. Look how small this house is. He lived in this house with his parents and 2 siblings. Despite his modest upbringing, Hoover always had very fond memories of his childhood. He may have had some pretty fond memories, but dang, after everything he went through, I'm sure he had some pretty terrible memories too. When Herbert was 2, he died. Well, he almost died. He had stopped breathing while suffering from croup, but his uncle, John Minthorn, resuscitated him. When Herbert was 6, his father suddenly died from a heart attack. This left Huldah to take care of Herbert and his 2 siblings on a very meager income. She was able to scrap money together to survive and provide the kids an education, thanks not only to Jesse's insurance he left behind, but also because of her sewing and her basically turning her small home into an Airbnb. She also became a Quaker minister, even traveling throughout Iowa to preach. On one such trip, Huldah got sick and never got better. She died from typhoid fever on February 9th, 1884 at the age of 35. Herbert, who was only 9 at the time, was now an orphan. He ended up separated from his siblings and they lived with different family members. For a year and a half, Herbert lived with his aunt and uncle, Millie and Alan Hoover, at a farm just outside West Branch. However, in November 1885, he moved way across the country to live with his uncle, John Minthorn, in Newburgh, Oregon. Yep, the same uncle who saved his life. Minthorn, his wife Laura, and their family had moved from Iowa to Oregon a year before after their own son had died. And they indeed took Herbert in like a son. And now I'm standing in front of Herbert's aunt and uncle's house, the home in which he lived during his tween and much of his teen years. Hoover had a hard time adjusting here, to say the least. Minthorn was particularly strict with him and demanded excellence. Minthorn made sure Herbert was educated, enrolling him at the Friends Pacific Academy. Hoover struggled there, both socially and academically, failing pretty much all subjects except for math. He dropped out at the age of 13, but Minthorn was like, if you're not gonna go to school, you're gonna work for me. The young Herbert became an office assistant for Minthorn's real estate company in nearby Salem. Over the next few years, he quite enjoyed making money while learning bookkeeping and typing. Herbert did continue going to school at night, learning more advanced mathematics. And then one day, he found out about this brand new magical college called Stanford University, located near the beautiful town of Palo Alto, California. Well, Herbert got in, despite failing all of his entrance exams, except mathematics. He was also a mediocre student at Stanford, but it was there that he became passionate about geology. After working all over the country for John Casper Branner, the head of the university's geology department, Hoover ended up getting a degree in geology as part of the first class to graduate after 4 full years at Stanford. It was also in Stanford's geology department where Herbert fell in love. He met Lou Henry, a fellow geology major and the school's only female geology major at the time. After Hoover graduated, he sadly left Lou as she had to finish up school and he had to find work. He had barely made any money while in college and found job prospects slim due to the United States being in an economic recession. He finally found work in the gold mines of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, but the hours were long and the pay low. Soon he found work as a mine scout, or someone who goes around and finds potentially profitable places to dig for gold. In 1897, Hoover got a huge break after the London-based firm Bewick, Mooring and Company hired him as an engineer for the gold mines in Western Australia. His salary, $5,000 a year, which is like $170,000 a year in today's money. Pretty good. That said, it was rough work. It was out in the middle of nowhere in the Great Victoria Desert under bleak conditions. All this time, though, he never stopped staying in touch with Lou. One day, soon after Lou had graduated from Stanford herself in 1898, Hoover sent her a marriage proposal via telegraph. She wired him back, "Heck yeah, I'll marry you," or something along the lines of that. Hoover made Bewick, Mooring and Company a lot of money. Like, a lot of money. First of all, he convinced the firm to invest in some very profitable gold mines. This led to Bewick Mooring controlling around half of all gold production in Western Australia. But he also made them money as a seemingly ruthless capitalist. He brought in a bunch of Italian immigrants to work those mines, since they worked for far less wages than the local unionized workers. He also fought the minimum wage and workers' compensation. Oof, not a good look there, Hoover. But because he made all this money for the firm, they promoted him to be a partner and sent him to develop gold mines in China. Herbert first made the long trip back to California. He and Lou married on February 10th, 1899. Literally the next day, they sailed from San Francisco to Shanghai, China, then settling in a big house in Tianjin, which was the nearest big city near the gold mines. While living there, Hoover completely immersed himself with Chinese culture. He learned Chinese history and attempted to become fluent in Chinese. Lou became quite fluent herself. Despite this, Herbert, unfortunately, also learned how to be racist toward the Chinese, claiming they were bad workers and, quote, racially inferior. Despite the racist beliefs, he did call for reforms for Chinese workers. He might have been influenced by the ongoing Boxer Rebellion, an anti-foreigner, anti-colonial uprising of the locals that put the Hoovers' lives in danger until military forces defeated them in the Battle of Tientsin. In late 1901, Hoover was promoted again, this time to the operating partner of Bewick, Mooring and Company. In this position, he traveled the globe multiple times to various gold mines that needed help. And Lou almost always came along with him. When they weren't traveling the entire planet, they were in London. That's where their 2 sons were born. There was Herbert Hoover Jr., born in 1903, and Alan Hoover, born in 1907. And yep, they traveled with their dad on his work trips as well. But the travel was wearing Hoover down. Plus, Bewick, Mooring and Company had gotten into some legal troubles. so Hoover wanted out. In 1908, he sold all his shares in the firm and became an independent mining consultant and money handler, still based out of London. Hoover specialized in helping troubled mining operations, earning a reputation by this time as a, quote, doctor of sick minds. In the following years, he made investments on literally every continent and had offices in San Francisco, New York City, Paris, Petrograd, and even Mandalay in modern-day Myanmar. He helped start the Zinc Corporation, a company which mined, wait for it, zinc. You knew that already, didn't you? He also worked with companies that mined silver, copper, and lead. In his spare time, he wrote books and gave lectures sharing what he had learned in the mining industry. Universities published his lectures. In 1912, Herbert and Lou made the first English translation of De Re Metallica. No, not that Metallica. Yes, that one, which is an important book about everything metals. By 1914, Hoover had become a very wealthy man, worth approximately $119 million in today's money. Throughout his travels, he had become acutely aware of the extreme wealth inequality throughout the world, and thus had notably changed his views on workers' rights. He now came to realize the extreme importance of unions and called for an 8-hour workday. He even supported Teddy Roosevelt's third-party presidential run in the epic election of 1912. He also figured by that time, I've made enough money. It's time to give back. So he dedicated the rest of his life to public service. 1 week before Hoover's 40th birthday, World War I broke out. Still living in London, the United States government asked him and other prominent American businessmen living in Europe to help evacuate the more than 120,000 Americans trapped on the continent during the war. After Germany invaded Belgium, Hoover pooled his money with other wealthy friends to organize the Commission for Relief in Belgium, or CRB. Without any support whatsoever from any government, Hoover raised millions to provide food and medicine for those trapped in Belgium. Not only that, Hoover worked 14-hour days out of London, overseeing the distribution of more than 2 million tons of food to 9 million war victims. Holy wowza. He crossed the North Sea 40 times to meet with German leaders there to persuade them to allow food shipments. Impressed with what the CRB was doing, the French government asked Hoover for help, and Hoover was like, heck yeah, players. Sending lots of food and medicine to German-occupied northern France. Later, the journalist and diplomat Walter Page would describe Hoover as, quote, probably the only man living who has privately, i.e. without holding office, negotiated understandings with the British, French, German, Dutch, and Belgian governments. After the United States entered the war in 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked Hoover to head the United States Food Administration, and Hoover ran it like a boss. Instead of rationing, Hoover called for set days for people to avoid eating certain foods to save those foods for American soldiers. For example, he's a big reason why, quote, meatless Mondays became a thing. By the end of the war, Herbert Hoover was a household name. He actually didn't care for the newfound fame, though. Oh, and by this time, Hoover and his family had moved back to the United States, having places in both Washington, D.C. and Palo Alto. President Wilson even brought Hoover to Versailles for peace negotiations after the war and made him the Director General of the American Relief Administration, an organization created to end widespread famine that had happened in Europe due to the war. As Director General, he even gave aid to Soviet Russia. After a critic accused him of helping communists, Hoover responded, quote, 20 million people are starving. Whatever their politics, they shall be fed. Altogether in that position, Hoover was able to get more than 34 million tons of food and supplies to people in 20 war-torn countries. Pretty impressive stuff. Due to his popularity, both the Democratic Party and Republican Party tried to get him to run for president in the election of 1920. Hoover decided to join the Republican Party, mostly since he figured they had a better shot at winning. But many Republicans didn't want him as their nominee since he had been so loyal to the Democrat Wilson. Instead, they nominated Ohio U.S. Senator Warren Harding, but after Harding won the election, he made Hoover his Secretary of Commerce. Hoover was so good at his job that he arguably caused the Department of Commerce to become as powerful of a government agency as the State Department. Contrary to popular belief, Hoover called for the government to be more hands-on when it came to the economy. He supported more government regulations on stuff like airplanes and radio, getting radio stations shut down if they were, quote, non-useful to the public. He convinced a wide range of industries to all adopt standardized tools. He also got standardized rules for cars on roads in order to reduce traffic accidents. That all said, he favored businesses working with the federal government voluntarily, not by force. And he was able to unite all kinds of business leaders who normally wouldn't give each other the time of day. He also, more than anything, made it clear that the goal was to make markets more efficient, and therefore, any government intervention was mainly to get rid of waste, yo. After Harding died while in office and Calvin Coolidge became president in 1923, he was so impressed with Hoover that he kept him as the Secretary of Commerce. In my opinion, the most impressive thing Hoover did as Secretary of Commerce wasn't even in his job description. Yo. After the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 displaced some 1.5 million people from their homes, Hoover oversaw the creation of more than 100 tent cities and got more than 600 ships sent to the victims. Not only that, but he somehow managed to raise more than $270 million in today's money for victims. Hands down, Hoover was the most effective Secretary of Commerce the United States has ever had. After Calvin Coolidge awkwardly announced that he would not be seeking re-election, Hoover was the frontrunner to win the presidential election of 1928. The Republican Party did select Hoover as their candidate, with Senate Majority Leader Charles Curtis as his running mate. At Hoover's nomination acceptance speech, he said, quote, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of this land. We shall soon, with the help of God, be in sight of the day when poverty will be banished from this land." Yeah, man. Little did he know.
Did you say little did he know?
Yes.
I've written papers on little did he know.
Hoover easily defeated his main opponent, Democrat Al Smith, the governor of New York. I mean, he dominated. In one of the most lopsided presidential victories in American history, Hoover got 444 electoral votes and even won states that hadn't voted for the Republican candidate in more than 50 years. Hoover had hoped to govern in the progressive tradition of, believe it or not, Theodore Roosevelt, and things started off great, but little did he know.
I used to teach a class based on little did he know. I mean, I once gave an entire seminar on little did he know.
Similar to when he was Secretary of Commerce, his goal was improving public-private cooperation, which he called, quote, volunteerism. While he was cool with government influencing business, again, he wanted it to be voluntary. The first concern President Hoover had was millions of farmers not making money anymore. To fight this, he signed the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1929, the first big bill he signed, as a matter of fact. The new law's goal was to stabilize farm prices by having the federal government simply buy up a bunch of crops. Unfortunately, the law was kind of a failure, as the government couldn't keep up with buying all the extra crops farmers had. Regarding growing concerns of extreme wealth inequality and too much speculation on Wall Street, Hoover, kind of just ignored that. And then, what became known as Black Thursday. Oh, and Black Tuesday. October 24th, 1929, aka Black Thursday, and October 29th, 1929, aka Black Tuesday, are 2 days in which the largest stock market crash in American history took place. And boy, did people freak out. Hoover tried to put a positive spin on it, but privately, he also freaked out a bit. He met with both business and labor leaders, asking them to avoid wage cuts and worker strikes, hoping this would be a quick recession like the one that happened between 1920 and 1921. He did what he could to make loans easier to get. However, by 1930, things were not looking any better. Prices and profits were falling fast. The gross domestic product, or GDP, was shrinking. Stocks continued to fall. Unemployment was skyrocketing. But it is a myth that Hoover did nothing in response to what became known as the Great Depression. He did quite a bit, actually. The problem was, almost everything he did didn't help or even made things worse. First of all, he had a hard time communicating with Congress trying to pass effective legislation, and he had a hard time communicating with the general public when trying to ease anxieties. The worst law Hoover signed was arguably the Smoot Tariff Act, which was supposed to encourage people to buy American-made stuff by placing tariffs and thus increasing the cost of imported stuff, including imported crops. Instead, it led to trading partners retaliating by raising their tariff rates and ultimately froze international trade, causing company sales to drop everywhere. Hoover, buddy, what were you thinking? Soon after the law passed, the banks began to fail. By the end of 1930, 300 had failed, and $550 million of deposits were gone. Poof. By the end of 1931, nearly 2,300 banks had failed, along with $1.7 billion in deposits. By then, bank runs were a thing. A bank run is a panic in which depositors pull all their money out of the bank all at once, out of fear they might lose all of their deposited money if the bank fails. Of course, this only made the problem freaking worse. Millions of Americans became homeless as they lost everything. Thousands of them built shanty towns, and critics of Hoover called them, quote, Hoovervilles, to blame the Depression squarely on him. To most Americans, Hoover seemed apathetic and didn't do much. It's understandable why. When a bill came to his desk to sign that would give direct federal lending to Americans, he vetoed it, afraid Americans would become dependent on the government. But again, Hoover did try to do things to help people out during the Depression. It's just that almost everything he did failed. In an attempt to prevent more banks from failing and make it easier to loan money out, he created the National Credit Corporation, a voluntary association of bankers to help each other out, but the organization was extremely ineffective. After that didn't work, he called for the creation of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, or RFC, that effectively bailed out banks. Congress approved the RFC's creation, and while it did prevent several businesses from failing, it didn't increase banks' lending to Americans like Hoover had hoped. Not only that, Hoover was fixated on keeping a balanced budget and staying on the gold standard. Today, many economists agree that if Hoover just approved deficit spending, then Americans could have been saved from the worst effects of the Depression. But Hoover was too worried about inflation. Oh, deficit spending just means the government spends borrowed money instead of money it got from taxes. By the end of his presidency, he began to say, screw it, maybe we should just dabble in some deficit spending. He signed the Emergency Relief and Construction Act, which set aside $2 billion for public works, and he was a big reason why the Glass-Steagall Act later passed, which separated commercial and investment banking, but by that time it was too late. Unemployment was 25%. The Dow Jones Industrial Index, a stock market of huge American companies, had gone down by 89%. Bread lines like this were a common scene. People were suffering. And of course, even though the president doesn't have much control over the economy, Hoover got blamed for all the devastation. To add to his negative image was what became known as the Bonus Army. The Bonus Army was a group of thousands of starving World War I veterans who marched on Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1932, demanding an early cash redemption of their service bonus certificates for fighting in the war. They camped on the National Mall and clashed with local police, refusing to leave until they got their promised money early. And how did the Hoover administration respond? By removing all veterans off all government lands and burning all their shelters and belongings. No one knows what Hoover's approval rating was in 1932 because pollsters didn't exist back then like they do today, but it couldn't have been that high at all. Despite this, Hoover was like, I think I'm gonna run for re-election anyway. Most Republicans didn't want to even bother running anyone against Hoover for the nomination because they knew their party was doomed. In the presidential election of 1932, Hoover got destroyed. His opponent, Franklin Roosevelt, received the highest percentage of the popular vote ever for a Democratic Party nominee. Hoover got just 59 electoral votes. Interestingly, Hoover's last moves in office were sort of a preview of Roosevelt's later New Deal measures. Hoover went from being one of the most popular men in the country to the least popular. Bitter about his loss and how the country had turned on him, Hoover retired to his Palo Alto home. He and Lou lived there until her death from a heart attack in 1944. For the rest of his life after that, Hoover lived permanently at the luxurious Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Between 1933 and 1953, he was the only living ex-president, and he stayed very active. Believe it or not, he actually hoped to possibly run for re-election, but his popularity wasn't so good for the rest of the decade. He spent much of his time leading his public policy organization known as the Hoover Institution, which he had started back in 1919. Today, it's one of the most influential public policy organizations in the world. Most people don't know that during a 1938 trip to Europe, Hoover met with the German dictator Adolf Hitler and told him he didn't appreciate how Jewish people were being treated in his country. Take that, Hitler. That said, Hoover opposed getting involved after Hitler invaded neighboring countries in Europe and thus starting World War II. After the war ended, Hoover became friends with President Harry Truman, despite Hoover by this time identifying as a conservative who disagreed with most of Truman's policies. In 1946, Truman picked Hoover to tour Allied-occupied Germany and Italy to take care of the food needs of the victims of the war. Once again, this was Hoover's time to shine. His school meals program in Germany fed more than 3.5 million children. By the end of the 1940s, Hoover's popularity was going back up, and the New York governor Thomas Dewey even offered him a Senate seat. But it would have been for only 2 months, so Hoover declined it. Still, Hoover remained politically active for the rest of his life and was at every Republican national convention. When Hoover made public appearances, he often made fun of himself, often regarding his association with the Great Depression. He wrote several books, most of which criticized the New Deal policies of Roosevelt. After John F. Kennedy became president, he offered Hoover many positions, but Hoover, now in his late 80s, declined. Hoover would outlive even Kennedy, becoming only the second former president up to that point to reach the age of 90. But he died soon after that, on October 20th, 1964. The official cause of his death was massive internal bleeding. Hoover's historical reputation never fully recovered. Even today, the Great Depression and Hoover's name are often synonymous. But again, despite his mistakes reacting to the Depression, Hoover was only in office 4 short years, and while most historians view him as one of the worst presidents in American history, those same historians often acknowledge he was an amazing humanitarian and the best Secretary of Commerce ever. He single-handedly saved millions and millions of lives. How many presidents can say that, huh? In my opinion, we should remember Hoover, not just for being a crappy president,
but for feeding the world.
The fact is, few people in history have had as positive impact on the world as Herbert Hoover. That's a crazy sentence I just said, but it's 100% true.
Herbert Hoover, you got a bad rap, but the Great Depression was kind of your fault. Herbert Hoover, you did some great things. Tragically, history forgets that.
I am a man, and if you are too, you may be interested to know that testosterone levels dramatically decrease the older you get. This can cause you to lose muscle mass and even affect your mood and memory. So this brings me to the sponsor of this video, Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is a worldwide leader in at-home testing, and their male hormone tests let you easily and discreetly test your testosterone levels at home. You ship your sample, and once it arrives at the laboratory, confidential results will be available from your secure online account within 2 to 5 days. Let's Get Checked laboratories are CLIA approved and CAP accredited, which are the highest ranking levels of accreditation. So if you want to test your hormone levels without leaving your home, go to trylgc.com/beat and you can save 25% off your order by using code MrBeat25. Yeah, MrBeat25 will get you 25% off. I've also put this information in the description, buddy. So I plan on doing a video biography of every single president in American history at some point. So far I've done Herbert Hoover, obviously, George Washington, James Polk, and Franklin Pierce. Next up, I'm thinking about doing either Bill Clinton or Dwight Eisenhower. So I kind of want to just leave it up to you. Which one should I do next, Bill Clinton or Dwight Eisenhower? Let me know in the comments and I'll try to go to their presidential library to make the video. Thanks for watching.